Hi, this is Chris with MuseGrid, and let's make some more buttons. So now we're going to take a look at this dark UI sample. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a dark background here, and then drag these into place. In fact, let's go with slightly darker than that. So let's drop this down. Okay. So if we preview this now, we can see we're using the inset technique before, but I want to show you how we create this text with this drop shadow as well. Okay, so let's take the first button. So we're using a state button as the container, and we've just set the state button to be completely transparent. And we've put the border radius on the rectangle and the state button in this case as well. And then our button, let's take a look at how we get this look and feel to the button. So we're using a gradient, and we're using a gray here with a slight bit of blue in it, and then another darker version of that gray. We've also got then some effects that we're using. So we're using a drop shadow on here. So we're using a directly vertical drop shadow, so at 90 degrees, a blur of 7, a distance of 4, and at 50%. We're not using any bevel, but we are using an inner glow, and if we switch that inner glow off, you can see that the button goes a little bit flatter, but with that inner glow, it just gives us that nice little unique effect that looks almost like something created in Photoshop. Now the text, what we've done with the text is that the text is an off-white, so it's just slightly grey, so that just looks nice on top there. We can see that if it was just pure white, it would be quite stark, so we've just dropped the color down slightly there on the text color. But we can now use shadows, drop shadows on text, and instead of the drop shadow being applied to the entire text frame, it's applied just to the text. So you can see that what we've got now is we've got just a little bit of drop shadow that just makes that text stand off. So if we change font here, let's change the font to maybe, let's use this Ingra here, and let's just type this, click here. Maybe we'll change that to, we didn't apply it, hang on a minute. Let's go to Ingra, there we go. So you can see that text there, and we can even go with a lighter font as well. So let's go with a light there, and we've also applied some, here we go, let's just give it a little bit of spacing around it. You can see here we can do all sorts of things with the typography, but that little bit of drop shadow just makes the text just lift off the button there a little bit. So that's how we created the drop shadow on the text. Now for the other buttons here, with this button here, we're using the same technique as we have done with many other buttons, where we've got the state button as the container frame. We've just seen how we created this look and feel to this kind of like velvety grey feel. And then we're just using an icon font again here, and in a text frame. And we've just made the background here, we've made it, we've given a radius to the whole unit. And notice how this, the text frame itself is square, 48 by 48 pixels. You could use whatever size you want, but just in this particular instance. And then we're using a background fill color with 30% opacity. So then we just get that nice tint. Let's just move that to the back. Just get that nice darkening tint, making the icon lift off the page. Now we've done a similar thing here, but what we've done is we've just made it match the corner radius here, so we get these two different styles of buttons. So that's those buttons there, but let's take a bit more of an in-depth look at these interface kind of buttons here. Now let's separate these elements out. We're using the inset styling that we've used in a couple of other different buttons that we've shown in this series of videos, but in this particular instance we're using a gradient, and then we're using bevel effect on it as well. So we're using a gradient of a black at the top and then going into a lighter grey. And then we've got in the effects panel here, we're using a bevel, and we're again using the angle of 270 degrees to create so that the lighter part of the bevel sits at the bottom of the text frame and the shadow sits at the top, so we create that inset feel. Then we've got our actual button part here that we've got sitting over the top, and we've got our text sitting on the top of that, and that's when it's all put together in the state button here. That's what creates that whole kind of interface look. Now with this set of buttons here, let's just preview and refresh what we're seeing here. With this set of buttons, you can see that as we move over the buttons, they appear to go in, so they appear to drop down, which really feels like a kind of interface here. So let's see how we achieve those. Let's move these out. Now they're just a set of text frames again, and we've set the two outer ones with a radius on the edge here, flat on the inside. The middle one is flat either end, and then the end one finishes off the radius. But with the actual hover effect, when we're using the velvety kind of effect that we've used here, but on the rollover, let's take a look at what we've done here. Now we've created an effect in here. Let me just move this text frame out. Here we go. So we've got the background text frame here. And we've actually used a rectangle this time around. So we've got the text frame here, and the background to this is a rectangle. And if we take a look at how we've achieved this, we're using a gradient fill, that nice pink and purple. You could use any color you want. Let's switch that over to the green if you want. And then on the effects, we're using a bit of shadow, but set to 0. So when we hover over it, again, we've said in previous videos that if you want an effect to be smooth, it has to be applied to all the different states, even if you set the opacity to 0. So we've switched the shadow off. Then we've got our bevel at the 270, so we're kind of like using the same inset styling. So the bevel's gone from having no bevel to having an inset bevel that makes it feel like the button has gone in. And then we're using an inner glow in black. If we switch that off, you'll see and a blur of 43 that just it darkens the gradient and makes that whole button feel like it's been pressed down. So by just using those techniques, if we take a look at that again, so we've used the gradient, we've then used we've switched the shadow off by just taking its opacity down, we've used the bevel upside down almost at 270 degrees, so we've got the light on the bottom, so the light is catching on the bottom, and the shadows at the top, and then we've added some inner glow in black with a heavy blur on it to change. We can see here, in fact, if we turn all of these off, you can see there we've got that flat-ish gradient there. We add the bevel, that makes it feel a little bit more indented, and then we add the inner dark glow, and that creates that shadow there. And when those are all put together, if I just return everything back to the way it was here, when we put those all together, we refresh here, we can see that that inner bevel, and by taking the shadow away and adding that inner bevel and adding that kind of darkening inner glow, it just makes the items feel as if they've been pressed in. So that's the technique that we use to create those inset interface buttons. And it's really cool for if you wanted to create, like a playback interface or something like that, or you're creating an app kind of feel. That's a really nice technique to create those interface buttons that traditionally you would generally have made in Photoshop. So that's how we made the dark UI set.